11 at night. Rain hammered the windows of Rosie's diner. Colton wiped down the counter with hands calloused from 7 years of double shifts, raising a daughter alone. The woman slipped in like a ghost, soaking wet, red-rimmed eyes. She ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a $4 bowl of soup, then sat in the darkest corner, trying to hide the tears rolling down her cheeks. Colton didn't ask questions. He brought her hot bread, a cup of tea, and something she didn't expect, kindness from a stranger who had nothing to give. When she reached for her wallet, he stopped her. It's been taken care of. $47, his entire week's tips, gone for a woman whose name he didn't even know. She looked at him like no one had looked at him in years. The next evening she walked back through that door. But this time, a black Mercedes gleamed outside, and in her manicured hand was a single key that would change everything he thought he knew about second chances. The fluorescent lights of Rosie's diner buzzed overhead, casting a yellowish glow across the cracked vinyl booths and faded checkered floor. Colton Briggs had memorized every stain on that floor, every chip in the counter, every squeak of the kitchen door over the past 4 years. At 38, he moved through the late-night shift with the kind of efficiency that came from repetition rather than passion. His hands, rough and calloused from years of labor, worked automatically refilling coffee cups and clearing plates, while his mind drifted to the stack of bills waiting on his kitchen table. The smell of burnt coffee and bacon grease clung to his uniform, a scent that no amount of washing ever fully removed. His feet ached in his worn sneakers, but he had learned long ago to ignore the small discomforts that accumulated through each endless shift. Behind the kitchen window, Bert Henderson flipped burgers with the practiced ease of 3 decades at the same grill. The old cook had been at Rosie's since before Colton was born. His white hair tucked under a grease-stained cap, his eyes still sharp despite the deep wrinkles that mapped his face. He watched Colton move from table to table, shaking his head slowly. The boy worked too hard, carried too much weight on those shoulders. Bert had seen plenty of young men come through this diner, but none quite like Colton. None with that particular combination of exhaustion and determination that seemed to define his every movement. There was something unbroken in him, despite everything life had thrown his way, a stubborn flame that refused to be extinguished, no matter how strong the wind blew. Colton's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor who watched Bree on the nights he worked late. Everything fine. She's asleep. Drew you another picture. He smiled the first real smile of his shift, imagining his 9-year-old daughter curled up in her small bed in their cramped studio apartment. The image warmed something cold inside him. Bree was the reason he dragged himself through double shifts, the reason he had traded his dreams of architecture school for the reliability of steady tips and overtime hours. 7 years ago, when his wife had walked out and never looked back, leaving behind only a note, and a 2-year-old who kept asking for Mama, Colton had made a choice. He would be enough. He had to be enough. Every day since then had been a test of that promise, and every day he had somehow found a way to pass. The letter had arrived 3 days ago, and it still sat unopened on his kitchen counter, though he already knew what it said. The building was being sold. 3 weeks to find somewhere else to live, somewhere he could afford on a waiter's salary, somewhere that wouldn't uproot Bree from the school she loved and the friends she had finally made. The numbers didn't add up. They never did. But he had learned to survive on impossible math-stretching dollars like rubber bands until they snapped. The bell above the door chimed, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced up, ready with his standard greeting, but the words caught in his throat. The woman who stepped inside looked like she had walked through a hurricane. Rain dripped from her dark hair onto the worn linoleum, forming small puddles around her feet. Her clothes, a simple sweater, and jeans were soaked through, clinging to her frame. But it was her eyes that stopped him. Red-rimmed, swollen, carrying the kind of pain that Colton recognized all too well. She stood in the doorway for a moment, scanning the nearly empty diner, before making her way to the darkest corner booth, sliding in with her back to the room, as if trying to disappear into the shadows. Colton grabbed a menu and a glass of water, approaching her table with measured steps. Up close, he noticed more details. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted the menu. No wedding ring, but a faint tan line where one might have been. Her nails were neat, unpainted, the hands of someone who worked, but not with their hands. She was beautiful in a quiet, understated way, the kind of beauty that didn't require makeup or jewelry to announce itself. Around 40, he guessed, though, the sadness in her eyes made her seem both older and younger somehow. There was a refinement to her features, a bone structure that suggested good breeding or good fortune, yet tonight she looked like neither mattered. Tonight, she looked like someone whose world had crumbled to dust. She ordered the soup of the day without looking at the menu. $4, the cheapest item they served. Colton wrote it down, noting how she kept her face turned toward the rain-streaked window, her reflection ghostly in the dark glass. He returned to the counter, placed the order with Bert, and began preparing a small pot of tea. The chamomile was almost empty, but he scraped together enough for 1 cup. He added it to a tray, along with a basket of warm bread rolls that Bert had just pulled from the oven, steam still rising from their golden crusts. When he delivered the soup, he set down the tea and bread, as well, arranging them carefully in front of her. "I didn't order these," she said, her voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. There was no accusation in her tone, only confusion, as if kindness were a foreign language she had forgotten how to speak. "On the house," Colton replied, keeping his voice gentle. "Rainy night special." She looked at him, then really looked, and he saw something flicker in those tired eyes. Surprise, perhaps. Or confusion. In her world, whatever world she came from, Colton suspected that nothing came without strings attached. She nodded slowly, wrapping her hands around the warm soup bowl as if drawing strength from its heat. Her fingers were long and elegant, but they gripped the bowl like it was a lifeline, the only thing keeping her from drowning in whatever grief had brought her here. He gave her space after that, busying himself with the few other customers who drifted in and out. A truck driver nursing his 3rd cup of coffee, complaining about the highway construction that had added 2 hours to his route. A young couple sharing a slice of pie after what looked like a rough date, their conversation stilted and awkward, both of them clearly wondering if there would be a second one. The hours crept toward closing time, and still the woman sat in her corner booth, stirring her soup without really eating, staring at nothing. Twice he saw her wipe her eyes with the back of her hand, quick, furtive movements, as if ashamed of her own tears. The rain had stopped outside, but she made no move to leave, as if the diner had become a sanctuary she wasn't ready to abandon. During his break, Colton sat at the counter with a cup of coffee, pulling out a stack of napkins and a worn pencil. This was his secret ritual, the thing that kept him sane during the long nights when the weight of his life threatened to crush him. He sketched on the napkins architectural designs that existed only in his imagination. Tonight he drew a living room, cozy and warm, with built-in bookshelves and a window seat overlooking a garden. The kind of room he dreamed of designing, the kind of home he dreamed of giving Bree someday. His pencil moved with practiced ease, translating the images in his mind into lines and shadows on the cheap paper. In these moments, with graphite on napkin, he wasn't a tired waiter worried about rent. He was an architect. He was someone with a future. "Those are beautiful," he startled, nearly spilling his coffee. The woman had approached, silently standing just behind him, her eyes fixed on his sketches. He instinctively moved to cover them, embarrassed by this private glimpse into his dreams. But she had already seen. Her gaze traced the lines of his drawing with something that looked like recognition, like understanding. "You're very talented," she continued, her voice steadier now, though still touched with sadness. Did you study architecture? Colton shrugged, tucking the napkins into his apron pocket where they joined a dozen others. 2 years of community college. Life had other plans. She nodded as if she understood exactly what he meant. Life often does. She paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. I'm sorry for intruding. I should get my check. He walked her back to her booth, tallying her bill in his head. $4 for the soup. Nothing for the tea and bread. Nothing for the kindness that cost him nothing to give, but meant something he couldn't quite name. She reached for her purse, and that's when he saw it. A photograph tucked into the side pocket worn at the edges from handling. A man's face, handsome and smiling, frozen in a moment of happiness that clearly belonged to another time, another life. Her fingers brushed against it unconsciously, a gesture of habit and grief that told him more than words ever could. It's been taken care of, Colton heard himself say. She froze her wallet half open. Excuse me. Your tab, it's covered. He pulled out the tips he had earned that week, kept in a small envelope in his back pocket. $47 in crumpled bills and loose change. His grocery money. Bree's school supplies fund, the small cushion between surviving and not. He walked to the register and rang up her meal, pocketing the receipt before she could see the total. The woman stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Colton met her eyes, seeing his own reflection in their depths, a tired man in a stained apron, offering the only thing he had to give. Everyone deserves kindness on their worst day. For a long moment she said nothing. The diner was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Bert washing dishes, the comfortable background music of closing time. Then something shifted in her expression, a crack in the armor she had built around herself. Her eyes welled with fresh tears, but these were different somehow. Less bitter, more bewildered, as if she had forgotten that strangers could be kind without wanting something in return. What's your name? She asked softly. Colton. Colton Briggs. She nodded, committing it to memory. Thank you, Colton Briggs. Thank you for reminding me that good people still exist. She gathered her purse and stood pausing at the door to look back at him one final time. Her gaze lingered on his apron pocket where the napkin sketches peeked out before she disappeared into the night. The bell chimed behind her, and then she was gone, swallowed by the darkness and the wet streets. Bert emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. Did you just pay for that woman's meal? With your whole week's tips? Colton shrugged, already reaching for his cleaning cloth. She needed it more than I did tonight. The old cook shook his head, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth despite his concern. You're either the best man I know or the dumbest. Probably both, Colton admitted. He thought of the bills on his kitchen table, the eviction notice, the impossible math of his life. Tomorrow's problems could wait. Tonight, he had done something right. Tonight, he had been the person his daughter believed him to be. They closed the diner together in comfortable silence, the rhythm of their movements synchronized by years of shared nights. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets slick and shimmering under the streetlights like ribbons of black silk. Colton drove home in his ancient pickup truck, the engine coughing and sputtering but faithful as ever. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs to their studio apartment, careful not to wake Mrs. Patterson as he collected his sleeping daughter from the worn couch. Bree stirred as he tucked her into bed, her small hand reaching for his. Daddy. I'm here, baby. Go back to sleep. Did you have a good night? He thought of the woman in the diner, her red-rimmed eyes, her trembling hands. He thought of the $47 that would make this week harder than it needed to be, and he thought of the gratitude in her voice when she had said his name. Sometimes the right thing and the hard thing were exactly the same. Yes, sweetheart. I did. The morning came too quickly, gray light filtering through the thin curtains of their apartment. Colton woke to find Bree already up sitting at their small kitchen table, with her crayons spread around her in a rainbow explosion of color. She looked up as he emerged from behind the sheet that separated their sleeping areas, her face bright with the kind of enthusiasm only children could summon before breakfast. Her hair was tangled from sleep, and she had crayon smudges on her cheek, but her smile could have lit up the entire room. "I made you something, Daddy." She held up a sheet of paper covered in colorful scrawls. A house, he realized, his heart clenching. 2 stories with a yellow door and a garden full of flowers that looked like lollipops. Inside, she had drawn 2 figures, a tall one and a small one holding hands. A sun beamed down from the corner of the page, and she had written "Home" in careful, uneven letters at the top. "That's our dream house," she explained, pointing to each feature with a crayon-stained finger. "See 2 bedrooms, one for you and one for me. And a big kitchen, so you can make pancakes every Sunday. And a swing set in the backyard for when my friends come over." Colton took the drawing, his throat suddenly tight. He pulled her into a hug, pressing his face into her hair so she wouldn't see the tears gathering in his eyes. She smelled like crayons and the strawberry shampoo he splurged on because it was her favorite. "We'll get there, baby, I promise." Bree pulled back, her expression serious, in a way that seemed too old for 9. "Daddy, I don't care where we live. I just need you. The other stuff is just extra." Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at the screen and felt his stomach drop like a stone. The landlord again. The building had sold faster than expected. The new owner wanted possession in 2 weeks, not 3. 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live, somewhere he could afford. Somewhere that wouldn't pull Bree out of her school, away from her friends, away from the fragile stability he had fought so hard to build. 2 weeks and $312 in the bank. He drove Bree to school, kissed her goodbye at the entrance, and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, staring at nothing. His morning delivery job had cut his hours again. His afternoon cleaning gig had dried up entirely when the office building closed. He was running out of options, running out of time, running out of the careful optimism he had maintained for 7 years. For the first time since his wife had left, Colton allowed himself to consider the unthinkable. Giving up, moving back to his hometown, moving in with distant relatives who barely remembered his name, admitting defeat. But then he looked at Bree's drawing on the passenger seat. 2 bedrooms, a big kitchen, a future that someone still believed was possible. His daughter believed in him even when he couldn't believe in himself. He drove to Rosie's diner and clocked in early. The afternoon shift passed in a blur of coffee refills and small talk. Colton smiled at customers, took orders, cleared tables, all while his mind churned through impossible calculations. First month's rent, plus deposit, plus moving costs, plus keeping food on the table, plus keeping the truck running, plus keeping Bree from knowing how scared he truly was. The numbers never added up. They never had. He had been running on fumes and hope for so long that he had forgotten what solid ground felt like. "You look like someone ran over your dog," Bert observed, during a lull, sliding a plate of fries across the counter. "Eat something. You're making me nervous." Colton picked at the fries without appetite. Got 2 weeks to find a new place. Landlord sold the building. The old cook let out a low whistle. "That's rough. How much you need?" "More than I've got. More than I can get." Bert reached for his wallet, the leather worn soft from decades of use. "Let me help. I've got some savings." But Colton stopped him with a raised hand. "Don't. You've got your own bills to worry about. Your wife's medications alone cost more than my rent." "You know what your problem is," Bert said, tucking his wallet away with a frustrated sigh. "You're so busy taking care of everyone else, you forget someone might want to take care of you." Before Colton could respond, the bell above the door chimed. He turned automatically customer service smile already forming and felt the world tilt beneath his feet. The woman from last night stood in the doorway, but she was transformed like a butterfly emerged from a chrysalis of grief. Gone were the soaked clothes and haunted expression. In their place was a tailored blazer that probably cost more than his monthly rent heels that clicked against the linoleum with authority and an air of controlled power that seemed to change the very atmosphere of the diner. Behind her through the window, Colton could see a black Mercedes parked at the curb, its polished surface gleaming like a dark mirror. Every head in the diner turned. Conversation stuttered and stopped. This woman did not belong here, and everyone knew it. She stood out like a diamond in a pile of gravel, yet she walked in as if the cracked linoleum were a red carpet. She walked directly to Colton, her eyes never leaving his face. "You don't recognize me with dry hair, do you?" He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. You're the from last night." A small smile curved her lips, the first genuine smile he had seen from her. "May I sit down? I believe we have some business to discuss." He led her to the same corner booth, but this time she slid in and gestured for him to join her. Colton hesitated, glancing toward Bert, who nodded almost imperceptibly. He sat across from her, acutely aware of his stained apron and the coffee grounds under his fingernails. "My name is Vivian Ashford," she said, and Colton felt the blood drain from his face. Even he, disconnected, as he was from the worlds of wealth and power, recognized that name. Ashford Development. The gleaming towers that had transformed Chicago's skyline. The woman sitting across from him, the woman whose $4 soup he had paid for with his grocery money, was worth more money than he could comprehend. He couldn't finish the sentence. "A mess," she supplied, that faint smile still playing at her lips. "Last night I absolutely was," she told him then, in a voice stripped of pretense, about the anniversary she had been dreading. 5 years since her husband Robert's death. 5 years of smiling at board meetings and charity galas, while something inside her slowly calcified into stone. She had been driving aimlessly desperate to escape the emptiness of her penthouse apartment when she saw the lights of Rosie's diner. A place where no one would know her face. A place where she could just be a woman having a bad day instead of Vivian Ashford's CEO, who wasn't allowed to have bad days. "Your kindness," she said. Her voice, catching slightly, was the first real human connection I'd had in months. Everyone around me wants something. Money, influence, favors. You wanted nothing. You gave away money you clearly needed to a stranger who hadn't asked for help. Colton shook his head, still struggling to reconcile the broken woman from last night with the polished executive before him. "I just gave you some bread and tea. You gave me $47 you couldn't afford to lose." She reached into her designer bag and withdrew something small metallic, a key. She placed it on the table between them, and the fluorescent light caught its surface, making it gleam like a promise. "I'd like to give you something in return." He stared at the key as if it might bite him. "What is this?" "An opportunity," she said firmly. "Not charity. I need you to understand the difference because I suspect your pride is about to get in the way." She explained her words precise and businesslike, but her eyes warm. An apartment in Wellington Tower, one of the buildings she owned downtown. 2 bedrooms, modern kitchen view of the lake. Rent of $1 per month for 1 year. And a job. Junior interior designer on her company's biggest project of the year. 6 months to prove himself. No special treatment, no safety nets. If he failed, he was out. If he succeeded, he would have earned his place. "I can't accept this," Colton heard himself say. "I don't even have a degree. I'm just a waiter who doodles on napkins." Vivian reached into her bag again and withdrew a crumpled napkin. His napkin, the one he had drawn on last night. The living room with the built-in bookshelves and the window seat. She must have taken it when he wasn't looking. She smoothed it flat on the table between them. "This doodle," she said, "shows more creativity than half the portfolios I've seen from design school graduates. I built an empire by recognizing talent others overlook. Don't insult my judgment." "Why me?" he pressed, needing to understand. "You could hire anyone in the country." Her eyes met his, and he saw in them a reflection of his own loneliness, his own determination. "Because anyone wouldn't have spent their week's tips on a stranger's soup. I need people with heart, not just skill. Skill I can teach. Heart, that's rare. And if I fail," Vivian leaned back, her expression honest, "then you fail. You'll have had 6 months in a nice apartment and a chance to prove yourself. Worst case, you go back to waiting tables with a story to tell. Best case, you change your daughter's life forever." He thought of Bree's drawing, 2 bedrooms, a big kitchen, a dream that suddenly felt close enough to touch. He thought of the past 7 years, fighting alone, convinced that accepting help was the same as admitting failure. And he thought of Bert's words, "You forget someone might want to take care of you." Colton picked up the key. It was warm from her hand, solid and real. "When do I start?" Vivian smiled, and this time it reached her eyes, transforming her whole face. "Monday. Don't be late." Behind the counter, Bert wiped his eyes with the corner of his apron, not even pretending he wasn't crying. The first week at Ashford Development nearly broke him. The offices occupied 3 floors of a glass tower downtown, all sharp angles, and minimalist design filled with people who looked like they had stepped out of magazine spreads. Colton showed up on Monday in his best button-down shirt, painfully aware of the wrinkles he couldn't afford to dry clean away. His shoes were scuffed, his tie slightly crooked, and he felt every inch the imposter he feared he was. He felt the stares following him as he walked to his assigned desk. The whispers weren't subtle. "That's the diner guy." Heard the boss found him at some greasy spoon. Charity case, obviously. Wonder how long he'll last. He lasted. Through the scornful glances and the deliberate exclusions from lunch conversations. Through the mountain of software tutorials he had to master and the design terminology that felt like a foreign language. Through the late nights when he stayed at his desk, long after everyone else had gone, teaching himself the things his 2 years of community college hadn't covered. He learned the names of every software program, every technique, every principle of design that his colleagues took for granted. He arrived first and left last, determined to earn his place through work, not through Vivian's favor. His first real test came at the end of the month. A design proposal for a model apartment, his chance to prove he belonged. He poured everything into it, every idea he had ever sketched on napkins and scraps of paper, every dream he had carried silently for years. He submitted it with shaking hands and a heart full of hope. Garrett Morrison destroyed it in front of the entire team. "This looks like something a child drew," the senior designer declared, holding up Colton's work with obvious disdain. Garrett was everything Colton wasn't. Yale degree, 15 years of experience, suits that cost more than Colton's truck. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his criticism perfectly aimed. "Did you learn design from YouTube tutorials?" The room fell silent. Eyes darted between Colton and Garrett, waiting for a reaction, perhaps hoping for one. Through the glass wall of her office, Colton could see Vivian watching. She didn't move, didn't intervene. Her expression was unreadable. He gathered his rejected proposal, walked back to his desk, and started over. That night, alone in the darkened office, Colton sat surrounded by crumpled drafts and cold coffee. Version 4. Version 5. None of them good enough. His phone showed a photo of Bree on the lock screen, grinning in her new bedroom, the first room of her own she had ever had. She had decorated the walls with her drawings, and her smile in the photo was brighter than he had ever seen it. He thought about calling Vivian, telling her he quit, admitting that he had been foolish to think he could belong in her world. Footsteps in the hallway. He looked up to find Vivian standing there, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She walked to his desk without a word and set 1 cup in front of him. The gesture was small, but its meaning was enormous. The CEO of a billion-dollar company bringing coffee to her newest, lowest-ranking employee at midnight. "Version 5, she asked. 5.5, actually. She pulled a chair over and sat beside him close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive. "Show me what Garrett didn't like." They worked until 2 in the morning, side by side, not as CEO and employee, but as 2 people who understood something about fighting for dreams that others dismissed. She showed him where his instincts were right and where his technique needed work. She pushed him harder than any professor ever had, accepting nothing less than his best. But her criticism was constructive, aimed at making him better, not tearing him down. "You have something most designers don't," she told him, as they finally gathered their things to leave the city, lights twinkling outside the window like earthbound stars. "You understand what it feels like to want a home and not have one. Use that." He did. He redesigned the apartment proposal 8 times each version better than the last. He learned to translate his napkin sketches into professional renderings, to speak the language of textures and spatial flow and client expectations. When he finally resubmitted, even Garrett couldn't find fault with the result. The clients, a young couple buying their first apartment, looked at his design and cried. "This is exactly what we dreamed of," the wife said, clutching her husband's hand. "How did you know?" Colton thought of all the years he had spent dreaming of something better. "I guess I just understood what it means to want a place to call home." The months that followed built on that foundation. One success led to another, each project a little bigger, each challenge a little harder. Colton earned respect, not through Vivian's protection, but through his own persistence. Colleagues who had dismissed him began seeking his input. Garrett, while never friendly, stopped the open hostility. Even he couldn't deny talent when it was staring him in the face. Through it all, Vivian watched from a distance, stepping in only when necessary, pushing him just hard enough to grow without breaking. Their late-night work sessions became a regular occurrence, and gradually, the conversations expanded beyond design and business. She told him about her husband, Robert, about the life they had built together, and the emptiness he had left behind, about the guilt she felt for continuing to breathe when he couldn't, about the loneliness of being surrounded by people who only saw her net worth. Colton told her about his ex-wife, about the day he came home to find her gone, and the 7 years of learning to be both mother and father to a little girl who still sometimes cried for her mama. About the fear that he would never be enough, never provide enough, never be the parent Bree deserved. "We're both experts at being alone," Vivian observed one night, surrounded by blueprints and takeout containers. "Maybe we don't have to be," Colton replied before he could stop himself. She looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her expression. Then she smiled, soft and genuine, and something shifted between them that neither could name. One afternoon, Bert showed up at the office. The old cook stood in the gleaming lobby looking like a time traveler from another era in his worn flannel shirt and faded jeans. Colton spotted him from the elevator and rushed over, pulling him into a hug that made the receptionist stare. "Had to see it for myself," Bert said, his voice gruff with emotion. He looked around at the soaring ceilings and polished marble floors, then back at Colton. "You did good, son. Real good." Vivian smiled more often now. The employees noticed the change in her, the way the hard edges seemed to soften when Colton was around. She laughed at his jokes, stayed late to review his work. Found excuses to stop by his desk. The walls she had built after Robert's death were coming down brick by brick, and Colton was the one with the sledgehammer. One evening, Colton found a photo frame on his desk. Inside was a picture of Bree in the new apartment, her smile bright enough to light up the entire room. A small note was tucked behind the frame, written in elegant handwriting. "She's lucky to have you. V." The night before his final presentation, Bree brought him dinner at the office. She walked through the glass doors with a paper bag from Rosie's diner, delivered by Bert, with strict instructions. She found her father hunched over his computer, working on the design that would determine his future. "Mom never believed in you," she said quietly, setting the food on his desk. "But I always did, Dad." Colton pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I know, baby. I know." The presentation room was packed the next morning. Board members, investors, senior designers, everyone who mattered in Vivienne's world. Colton stood at the front, his hand steadier than he expected, and walked them through his vision for the main lobby of Lakeview Commons. Not just a lobby, but a space that would make people feel like they were coming home. Warm materials and soft lighting, cozy seating areas, and a massive window that framed the lake like a living painting. He spoke from the heart because that was all he knew how to do. When he finished, silence filled the room. 1 second. 2. Then an elderly investor rose to his feet and began to applaud. Others followed the sound, swelling until it filled the space. Even Garrett nodded a grudging acknowledgement of excellence that meant more than any applause. "Colton Briggs doesn't just pass his probation," Vivienne announced, her voice carrying above the applause. "Starting next month, he'll lead the interior design team for our next project." After the meeting, Vivienne led him to her private office. The view stretched across Chicago's skyline, a panorama of the city he had fought so hard to stay in. She closed the door and turned to face him, her expression softer than he had ever seen it. "I've been meaning to give you this." She placed something in his palm, a $50 bill and 3 ones. $47, plus interest. He laughed, the sound surprising both of them. "Keep it. That $47 bought me a life I never imagined." "It didn't buy anything," she corrected gently. "You earned everything here. I wouldn't have had the chance to earn it without you." They stood close now, closer than boss and employee, closer than two people who had both been alone for too long. The city spread out behind them, but neither was looking at the view. "Can I tell you something?" she said quietly. "That night at the diner, I wasn't just sad. I was empty. I had forgotten what genuine kindness felt like. You reminded me." "And you reminded me that it's okay to let someone help," Colton replied. "I spent 7 years thinking I had to do everything alone." Vivienne's smile turned soft, the smile of a woman who had finally allowed herself to hope again. "Bree's school play is next Friday." "Right. How did you know?" "She invited me. Last week. I hope that's okay." His heart swelled with something that felt like the beginning of a new chapter. More than okay. "And after the play," she continued, her voice careful but warm, "maybe dinner. The 3 of us. Not business, just dinner." Colton smiled, the same smile that had been missing from his face for 7 years. "I'd like that." When Colton walked into the apartment that evening, Bree launched herself at him before he could even set down his briefcase. "How was it, Dad? Did they like it?" He caught her mid-leap, spinning her in a circle that made her shriek with delight. "They loved it, kiddo. They really loved it. I knew it. I told Vivienne you'd be amazing." He set her down, surprise flickering across his face. "You talk to Vivienne." Bree grinned, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "She calls me sometimes. She's nice, Dad. And she laughs at your jokes, which means she really likes you because your jokes aren't that funny." Later that night, after Bree had finally surrendered to sleep, Colton sat at the small desk in the corner of their apartment. Before him lay the key Vivienne had given him 6 months ago, worn now from handling, from all the times he had held it, as a reminder of what was possible. Beside it, sat a fresh napkin and his old pencil, the same tools he had used in his darkest moments to sketch dreams that seemed impossibly far away. He began to draw. Not a design for work, not a project for approval. A house with a garden, modest but beautiful. A kitchen big enough for Sunday pancakes. A window seat overlooking flowers that didn't exist yet. And in front of it, 3 figures. A tall one, a small one, and one in between. A family that might still be possible. Colton smiled and set down his pencil. For the first time in 7 years, he wasn't drawing alone. He was drawing for a future that finally felt real. Outside the window, the city hummed with possibility. Somewhere across town, in a penthouse that no longer felt quite so empty, Vivian Ashford was looking at the same stars, thinking about a waiter who had reminded her that kindness still existed in the world. Some stories begin with grand gestures and dramatic moments. This one began with a bowl of soup, $47, and a man who understood that everyone deserves kindness on their worst day. It continued with a key, an opportunity, and the courage to accept help after years of going it alone. And now, as Colton finally allowed himself to imagine what might come next, he understood something he had forgotten long ago. The best chapters are the ones you don't have to write by yourself.